Chris Hartcher MP, Member for Terrigal and New South Wales Minister for Resources and Energy. Thanks for joining us at the CIS.
Always good to be here.
Excellent. Let's jump straight into it. Australia's energy future seems to have changed fairly radically over the last few years. Industry players have identified potentially hundreds of years of gas reserves, both CSG and shale gas, in New South Wales. And we've seen issues such as the carbon tax and the US energy self-sufficiency issue come more to centre stage. As the Minister for Energy, what do you see as the key opportunities and the big challenges facing New South Wales in the energy portfolio?
New South Wales infrastructure report, chaired by Nick Reiner, recently came down with their submission to the government. And there was a key sentence in that that said coal seam gas is the game changer for New South Wales. Gas extraction, mainly from shale, has been the game changer for the United States. It's turned the United States from an energy importer to an energy exporter, and it's driving the revitalisation of the United States economy. The development of a successful gas industry in New South Wales won't just be a sideline, just one of those profitable enterprises that you might have in a state. It will be potentially an enormous boost to the economy of New South Wales. It will give us a security of supply to our 1.5 million customers of gas. It will ensure a future transition from coal-fired electricity generation to gas-fired generation, then to renewable energy. So it will achieve our objective of a reduction in the emission that we're making of CO2. So at every level, the development of gas is probably one of the major issues, major opportunities on the horizon for this state.
Sure. Coal seam gas extraction, particularly hydraulic fracturing, or fracking as it's known, is quite a controversial and emotive issue in New South Wales. And in the last few days, we've seen comments from people like the Commonwealth Environment Minister Tony Burke that question the appropriateness of the New South Wales government position on fracking. What are your views on CSG extraction, and how do you think New South Wales should handle the fracking debate?
There's an enormous amount of misinformation about fracking, and there's an enormous lack of information about fracking. The first point on the misinformation, a huge amount of public concern is generated largely by the American film called Gaslands, which actually dealt with shale gas. It doesn't deal with coal seam gas. So it's simply not relevant to the New South Wales experience, but that's not well understood. The second point is that there was an absence of regulation in New South Wales. Under the previous government, as has been now well exposed through the ICAC hearings, there was a free-for-all as far as the mining and gas extraction industries were concerned. And this government, since it took office, has addressed that. It's introduced the toughest regime of requirements that you can have for Australia and by world's best practice standard, to make sure that anything that proceeds in the area of gas extraction is at the highest level of community protection and environmental protection and water protection. In relation to fracking or hydraulic fracturing in particular, there are now more and more ways where you can extract the gas without using the fracturing, but there are still cases where you have to use fracturing. If you do have to use fracturing, then it has to be according to the world's best practice, and that's what we've put in place in New South Wales, oversighted by the Chief Scientist and peer-reviewed by the universities. So what we've done in New South Wales really is to try and elevate it to the highest possible level of protection.
Fantastic. Related to CSG, obviously, we've seen some groups in the media calling for government to take action to ensure that Australian industry, particularly manufacturers, has, and as the members of the Prime Minister's Manufacturing Task Force put it, access to natural gas at fair and competitive prices, by which presumably they mean selling to local manufacturers at below export parity. Does the New South Wales government support this approach, and have you made that position clear to Canberra?
The New South Wales government hasn't developed a position on this. It's a very controversial but a very important issue, and it does need to be addressed, and we will be addressing it. We've had talks to other states. Queensland and Western Australia are obviously the two largest and the two most important. Queensland have developed a royalties concession policy to encourage use of gas on the domestic market. Western Australia have actually got a reservation policy. 15% of gas is reserved in Western Australia. So there are the two contrasts. The federal government's view is that if you produce enough gas, then the market forces, of course, will solve the problem for you. And that's understandable too. That's a very valid market hypothesis. So we're looking at all of these, and we're going to try and work our way through them. There is the argument that if you put the reservation policy in, you don't have a sufficient level of investment that deters investment. The West Australians say, well, if that was the case, why is there $100 billion worth of investment in the pipeline in Western Australia?
Absolutely.
A valid point, it needs to be addressed. So what we would like, obviously, is not to impose reservations. What we would like to is not to change the royalties policy, because that costs the state money. Ideally, the situation would be to have the market resolve it by producing enough gas so that it's sold broadly. But there may be a short transitional period to get to that stage where we would have to look at either royalties, concession or reservation.
Do you have a sense of timing as to when the New South Wales government position might be developed?
Well, New South Wales is fast facing a gas energy supply problem. The ACIL Tasman report and the Wood Mackenzie report both showed that New South Wales is going to face serious gas supply issues post-2014. So we really don't have a lot of time to develop a policy in this respect.
Sure.
We would anticipate that we would have one by 2014, 2015.
Okay, fantastic. Turning then, I guess, to the other constant media issue in the energy portfolio, and that's electricity prices. IPART has found that about half of the recent increase in costs were as a result of green schemes, both at the federal and the state level, including the carbon tax, but also others, while the energy regulator has approved something like $14 billion in capital expenditure on poles and wires in New South Wales as part of their latest price determination. Do you see a solution to energy price rises?
Yes, we do. We believe that we can bring energy price rises under control in New South Wales. That's a bold statement, but we think we're on the road to achieving it. We've put in place a wide range of measures to actually bring down the cost of investment into future electricity supply. And we've identified no less than $2.6 billion worth of savings in future investment, which will obviously come off the cost of the future capital expenditure. We anticipate that as from 1st July 2013, we can hold electricity price rises to the CPI. Now that's an extraordinary event in this state.
Certainly.
Because we had them go up 22% last year, we had them go up 18% the year before, we've had them go up on an average of 20% for the last 5 years. If we can get it to that target, and that's very, very soon, it's only 6 months away, 1st July 2013, holding it to CPI, and thereafter holding it to CPI, then we will have achieved an enormous breakthrough. And as I say, we've done that through a wide range of cost-saving measures.
Indeed. And obviously electricity privatisation seems to be on the agenda for the government. It's been an issue in the media since the previous government attempted to privatise generators. There's been a lot of misinformation about that process, a lot of emotive language. How will the energy and electricity privatisation proceed? What will be privatised and what won't be? And what are the benefits that that's going to generate?
What we're privatising is the electricity generators, the power stations, and we've engaged the major firm of Goldman Sachs to be the consultants for that project. We're also looking at possibly selling or leasing the large Cabora coal mine, which was going to supply a security of coal supply to the power stations. Now, that's underway. We're having negotiations with a number of interested parties to actually just buy that. It'll be a straight-out sale. The other major asset that the state would then continue to own would be the grid system, which is what's called the poles and wires. That's what everybody understands it to be. The government's made it clear that it would not proceed with a sale of the grid system unless it had an electoral mandate. So that's our position there. In relationship to the power stations, we pledged that we would institute a report as to whether they should be sold. We've carried out that promise. We had the Templin report. The Templin report recommended that they be sold, and we introduced the legislation to Parliament, and it passed the Parliament with the support of the Christian Democrats and the Shooters and Fishers Party.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Minister. Appreciate your time.
That's a pleasure, Simon.